talk about it. Let's get into a couple of topics. So I want to start in the world of college football. We are now, there's 2 games left in the regular season, not including conference championship games. And so we are getting closer and closer and closer to the first ever 12-team playoff, which I'm not going to get on my soapbox and rant about how this is not a good thing for the sport, but that's another story for another time. So, right now, as it stands, Oregon is still the top seed in the college football playoff. And guys, listen, don't ask me to explain how the rankings work because the way they are set up is not in from 1 to 12 is that is not how, if the season ended today, those 12 teams are not the teams that would be in the playoff, right? So Oregon's number 1, they would have the number 1 seed. They would face the winner of Alabama at Notre Dame. Boise State, group of 5 teams, excuse me, with the best record would get an automatic. I think if they're ranked higher than the top, one of the top group of 4 teams, they get to have the automatic 4 seed. So
yeah, so
Boise,
I think it's basically
yeah,
like, yeah, as long as they're ranked higher than the champion, right?
the
Isn't it?
champion
Isn't it
of a Power
champion
Four.
of the Power Four? Yeah. So
Yes.
in fact, like a Colorado or a BYU ends up winning the Big 12, and Boise State's ranked higher than them.
Yes. Yes. So they're the 4 seed. Texas is the 2 seed. Miami's the 3 seed, and then you would have hypothetically the winner of BYU Ohio State would take on BYU. The winner of Ole Miss Indiana would take on Texas, and the winner of Georgia and Penn State would take on Miami. So I think the first 3 out are Tennessee, SMU,
SMU.
and I'm missing somebody. I can't remember who the third team is, right? But those are the top 2 teams who are like ranked in that top 12 who, if the season ended today, would not be in. So your reaction to how this committee has put together this list so far?
The more I think about it, the more I look at everything. This is more difficult than like March Madness bubble teams. And you know how criticized they get with seedings and different regions and who goes where, whatever. Especially this year with a conference like the SEC, who has 4 or 5 2-loss teams. You have a conference like the Big Ten with multiple teams that are at the top with so yeah, it's very, very difficult when I'm looking at it to say this is wrong. You know what I mean? Like, this person should be here and this person should be here. There's and so I think that with that being said, I look at it in the totality of it. Like, are these currently the 12 best options, for this particular bracket, for this particular tournament? And I don't think it's far off. I don't think it's far off. And so, so I think that's mostly what you want to look at, and you look at it from a week to week basis. Like you said, we're looking at a tournament bracket that is absolutely not going to be what it showed on Tuesday at the end. It's going to be something totally different. And so you're just kind of showing, like, if the season was to end today, this is what it would look like. And then of course, as a Tennessee fan, I think we're sitting fine personally. The first team out with 2 games left to play, that should both be clear wins, and so you have 2 weeks. It's not even, 1 week, you can always get somebody get upset and but you have 2 weeks to get some help, to find yourself, put into that 12-team tournament. So I'm not mad at where Tennessee is. It would be a situation where if I was like, man, we should be 3 spots higher, then I would have, it's like, I think that we're, 10 at the best, 13 at the worst. I think we're in that range. So at 12 is not bad.
Yeah, I really wish they wouldn't put this list out week by week. I think all it does is just make them look bad, right? If you have, so trying to think if there's any glaring examples that really stick out. I think Texas as the number 3 overall team, and then them being the 2 seed. I understand they're projecting them as they're currently leading the SEC. But I mean, you've said it. I've already seen somebody else say it. Where like if Texas loses to A&M, you have a great case to not include them at all in the rank in the tournament. And if that's the case, right? Like if a one single loss can take you from being one of the automatic qualifiers to out completely, I think your ranking should reflect what their reality is. To get because then guess what happens? If Texas gets left out, let's just say they lose to A&M and they fall out of the top 12 completely, or not even just the top 12, they fall out of the playoff completely. That is going to lead a bunch of crying about how can we go from 2 to 13? How could we be left out when you got BYU or some Big 12 team, right? I've already heard what's the name of the quarterback from Bama?
I know you're talking Greg McElroy.
Greg McElroy. He's already said like, well, they got to do something about this, right? Because there's an imbalance. Because there's no way, that this Big 12 team should have an automatic bye when, say, Georgia has to play its way in. And I'm like, well, guys, that seems to be an SEC problem, not a Big 12 problem. Like, you're never going to have a perfect playoff system, right? We complained before the BCS. We complained about there was an imperfect system. We got the BCS. We complained that it was an imperfect system. We went to the college football playoff that had 4 teams. We complained that it was an imperfect system. And here we are with 12 teams, and we've already got Kirby Smart is already complaining. I don't know what these guys are looking at. It's ridiculous. Yada, 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 blah, 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 blah. There is no perfect system. There is no way to appease everyone, guys. And yes, listen, it's sports. Sometimes the team that maybe is on paper or maybe by Vegas odds would beat the other one doesn't always get into the big dance, guys. Sorry, you should have won your games.
Yeah.
You play to win the games. I get it. Georgia had a really tough schedule, right? So I wouldn't be mad at Georgia maybe being a 7th seed or a 5th seed based on their schedule, because their schedule is probably the toughest of all the 12 teams who are in the playoffs. I'm fine with that. But we're not going to sit here and slight the Big 12 because they're not in the SEC. That nobody asked y'all to get 18 teams. Y'all did that. So you can't try to stack the odds in your favor and continue to try to stack the odds in your favor. Like, it just, at some point, when is enough enough? So
yeah.
That being said, go ahead.
I think the biggest thing, is identifying like that mission statement, not the mission statement, but identifying that the what are we actually looking for, and I think the answer to it should be the 4 Power 4 conference champions, the one, what is it, power or outside of, what do they call it?
Group of
5 best team, and then the 7 best college football teams in America. Right?
But to me, that's subjective. I don't think you can clearly define who are the 7 best.
Right. It is subjective, but I do think you can, like, and I hate to say the eye test because the eye test is probably subjective too. You know what I mean? But I do think you can look at teams and say, if we all agree these teams up here, let's say just take the top 15, are really solid football teams. How have these teams competed against each other? Have they competed against each other? And when they have competed against each other, how have they fared? And so when you look at it that way, you say, well, Tennessee competed against 2 of them and they won 1 and they were competitive for 3/4 of 1 and lost, Okay, Texas competed with none of them, right? Or one of them, and lost, was down 23-0 at halftime, got it back in the 4th quarter to an 8-point game, So like, I think you can look at, the like that look, I think you can look at it that way and start to eliminate certain teams. And that's why I say, like, if a Texas loses to an A&M, they have no reason as a 2-loss team to be able to say, I should be above these other teams, when it's like, you have not given us any confidence that you can compete with the teams on the level in which we are putting in the 12-team playoff. The same with Indiana. I know it sucks. You have to play who's in front of you, right? But you got a chance to play against somebody that is going to be in the 12-team playoff. If you weren't competitive, then I can't confidently say you have the ability to compete on that level. Whereas you have an Ole Miss, or you have a Georgia, or you have a Tennessee, or you have a Notre Dame, or a Texas A&M, right? Because A&M A&M only beat LSU, but if let's say they beat a Texas, yeah. So you can say, hey, So I think that's the important thing, is just to kind of like identifying those 7 best teams. When it comes down to it, we're all going to say, well, they got a bad loss. Well, they lost to Northern Illinois. Man, Northern Illinois just lost to Miami, Ohio last night. You know what I mean? Like, they're terrible. Or they lost to Arkansas. They lost to Kentucky. They beat Kentucky by 1 at home and lost. You know what I mean? Like, so there's so many times you can look at the losses and everything. But it's possible, if Texas A&M wins, that there are 6 SEC teams with 2 losses in the top 12 to 13. And all of them beat each other, right? And then 2 of them are going to either be lucky or unlucky and have to play each other again.
Listen, as someone who likes to see the world burn, I really want Texas A&M to beat Texas, just so we can have all these 2 figure it out. Who the heck is even playing for the SEC title game? Like, I figure it out. Like,
I can tell you this
want
much:
to see
it does not help Tennessee at all if A&M beats Texas. Because I firmly believe if A&M beats Texas, Texas won't drop below Tennessee, and A&M will beat Tennessee.
I brought this up in the group this week. I find it funny. Isn't it interesting that if Texas was in the Big 12, they were still in the Big 12 conference, and they had the same resume they have today, right? We would have all the questions in the world about Texas. It would be one of the biggest stories of, I'm not sure this team deserves to be in here. I'm not sure. You're right. We would have all the questions in the world about them. Shout out to Ricky.
Yes, sir.
But because they're in the Big 12
SEC.
and because they're in the SEC and their signature win is Michigan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's
Vandy?
technically their signature win. The best team that they beat as a record rise right now is Vanderbilt. Yeah.
We would have, they would not be number 2. They wouldn't be number 3. They would be at the bottom half. And so when we talk about SEC bias, that's what we talk about.
You're also benefiting, though, heavily from the fact that the other 2 teams with 1 loss around them have equally terrible schedules, right? So Penn State and Indiana are the teams that they're vying with for that, like, in my mind, they should be on the very, with 1 loss, they should be a 5, a 6, something like that. It'd be very difficult. You might be right, Ricky. To be honest with you, Miami is flying so far under the radar. Like, Cam Ward's Heisman talk has been calmed down a whole lot. A lot of teams see them after they lost to Georgia Tech as like but Miami's still a very dangerous team. But I do think that because Penn State and Indiana have equally terrible schedules, that Texas is benefiting from them and being in front of both of them,
Yeah. So I'm going to pull this up on the screen here real quick so y'all can see it. I mean, you can see that this is what the bracket looks like. Let me see if I can I solo this? Full screen layout for just a second so you can see it. This is from the NCAA website, right? This is what the bracket looks like as it stands today.
And I'm not happy if I'm Oregon.
I mean, yeah. I ain't gonna hold you.
I don't want either one of those guys, like, I'd rather have the Texas or the Boise State. Well, maybe not Boise.
I'm not gonna hold you. I really want to see Notre Dame and Bama, even though I think Bama would win that game, but you would have Bama playing in the North. It snowed in South Bend today, by the way, a light dusting. So you would have Bama up north in the cold in December playing at Notre Dame. You want to talk about blockbuster TV. Now, this is why the reason why the playoff expanded is just for this reason right here, right? So that we could potentially get Penn State and Georgia playing at Happy Valley at night, probably. Although if you've been following the whole Big Noon kickoff fiasco, there's been a bunch of complaining. So when Penn State played Ohio State, the Penn State fan base was really pissed off because Penn State was playing. There was a big noon kickoff, right?
Hmm.
It's the Big Ten is on the CBS. They're on Fox and NBC, right? And so it's kind of like with the NFL where teams certain rights have certain rights to certain games. And so
Right.
Ohio State has played something like 6 or 7 Big Ten kickoff games because that is the flagship program of the conference. And so, like that Penn State Ohio State game, normally under other circumstances would have been a night game, white out, Happy Valley. That's kind of tradition. But because of Big Noon kickoff, it happened at noon. So having Georgia and Penn State play at noon would be hilarious just to make everybody mad.
Oh,
Um,
that's funny.
but yeah, man, like I listen, I have no idea who's good this year. I don't think Notre Dame, even if they make it into the playoffs, assuming they beat Army, that's a big which didn't think I would be saying this in 2024. Playing Army neutral site, which would be their last opportunity to have another ranked win on their schedule. That's coming up this weekend. If they can beat them in USC, I don't maybe they can win their first game. I don't think they can win 2 in a row or even make it to the semifinals, but we'll see. But again, I wish they would wait until the end to talk about these things and release
Yeah,
the list
because
once and for all.
sorry, I just got that notification from Sleeper, and it was like, you haven't set your lineup. You have 4 teams on bye, and NFL games are starting in 45 minutes. I was like, appreciate you, Sleeper.
Man,
So, and
man,
that
I'm
was
trying to
that's
think.
the dynasty league too. So like, there's no free agents to get, so I had to go start Elijah Moore, who's playing in 45 minutes. I'm like,
I have
anyway,
no Browns or no. Well, I got Pat Fryermuth. He's the only
yeah.
Steeler I got, so I'm not really worried
So
about it.
so like I say, showing every week, right? Showing it every week like hold you accountable to something that you don't even know if is right. You know what I mean? So like when you're looking at it, like Texas, like imagine Texas just getting beat by a couple touchdowns or something like that. You could have not showed it and could have easily put Texas at 14 and been like, listen, all they beat is Vandy and they lost to Georgia by 2 touchdowns and they lost their other ranked game. Now because you thought you were smart and had them at 3, they go in and lose that game, you're going to look crazy dropping them 11 spots. You know what I mean? And so it holds you accountable to something that you don't even know if you got it right yet. And so I definitely think that, like you said, there's a reason why March Madness, it comes out. You're on bubble watch. You're on that. You're at edge of your seat that day, and you're gonna find out what people really think of you and what they don't. And then
Yeah.
it's like, boom, sorry, we had to make a decision. But this whole
So,
every week type thing.
so if you had to give who your top 3 favorites to win the national championship as it stands today, who are you picking? And
I'm
if you want
picking
me, I can pull.
Oregon.
Okay.
I'm Oregon, Ohio State,
Okay.
and Ole Miss.
Wow. Well, that's interesting.
I think Ole
Ole
Miss is
Miss.
as much as I'm not sold on them. I think they're playing top 4 football
Okay.
right now. And I think defensively, what they did against Georgia, just a few weeks ago, we know Jackson Dart offensively, they can get hot offensively. And coaching wise, Lane Kiffin's been there before. You have to ask, you have to remember, like, if you're not one of these power conference teams, if I'm not mistaken, you have to win 4 games to win the national championship. And if you're a power conference winner, you still have to win 3 games. We're talking about 12 teams who haven't beat a top 10 team more than once all year if you're not named Georgia. And now you
Yep.
got to
Georgia's
win.
the only one.
And now you got to win 4 in a row against the top, So you're going to have to go with the teams that have been the most complete with Oregon and Ohio State. And then what I think is, I just think, from a hot at the right moment time for me, I think Ole Miss is kind of catching their.
So I'm going to say I'll agree with the first 2. I'm going to go with Georgia still. I think now this is a big if because he's been up and down. And I keep wanting to call this kid Brock Vandergriff, and that is not his name at all. I think that was like the Kentucky quarterback.
Yes, he is.
Um,
You know, like Carson Beck.
Carson Beck, thank you. I don't know why I want to call him Brock Vandergriff. Like every time I can see his face, and that's the only
I
name
need
that
him to
pops
do
up.
2 more games like he played the Tennessee game. I need one more because of the interceptions all before the Tennessee game. I don't know they were a fluke. You know, he played a great game against Tennessee, but he needs to finish the season like that.
If he can finish the season like that, Georgia can absolutely beat anybody on that
Yeah.
field. And I know there's already been some talk about. I've already seen this start too, but we can move on. Well, there could be a 3-loss SEC team. I've seen like South Carolina, right? Granted, South Carolina's played. They've got a couple of heartbreaking losses,
Oh
right?
yeah.
I think Georgia being one of them. They should have beat
Alabama.
Georgia.
Two-point
They should,
conversion. Kid's wide open.
right? Because they lost to Georgia, right?
No, it's
They lost
Alabama.
to
Remember?
Okay, they should have beat Bama. They should have beat LSU. I can't remember who that third loss was against.
Yeah, I'm not
But
sure. I just remember Bama. Remember they almost scored. They missed the 2-point conversion. Kid was wide open. They kicked the onside kick, recovered it, and then he threw a pick. You know, so they had multiple. But yeah,
yeah. So I mean, I've already seen people try to make that case of, well, if South Carolina finishes 9-3, and some of these other teams falter, right? They beat Texas A&M. They got Clemson to close their season, which is ranked 17th. So that would give them another top 25 win. They got drummed by Ole Miss, though. I'm trying to look at any other, but they put the beats on A&M.
yeah.
Put the beats on A&M. Beat Missouri when they were ranked. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting.
Before we
Yeah,
segue, last question is: conference championship games, should they hurt you if you lose them?
depends on who you are, right? Let's just say you're Bama, right? Let's just say that it's Bama versus Texas. You lose. Texas beats Bama. Let's say they beat them 10 points. So maybe not super convincing, but convincing enough. I think if you're Tennessee beat them, right?
Tennessee beat Bama, yeah.
Tennessee should jump Bama in that case. If you are, hold on, let me see if I can go pull up these rankings here.
Georgia and Ole Miss, right? They both with 2
Georgia.
losses.
Okay, if you're Indiana, you lose to Ohio State. You have 1 loss. Should Indiana feel justified in moving ahead of Bama if they lose in the SEC title game?
I mean, 3 losses to 1 loss is a tough. You can. That's the thing is record. You can always kind of like say, well, I mean, you win your games. You know what I mean? Like, and 3-1 is a big difference. Sometimes when it's just 1 game, you're kind of like, well, I had to play an extra one. 3-1 is a big difference. Mm-hmm. And so, but I mean, I just was was hearing some things. And it's like, well, if you do win the SEC championship, you get a perk of not having to play a game, right? So,
right.
Don't act like you're going to this game and the only thing it can do is hurt you, right? It can knock you out, but it can also put you 1 step closer than everybody else.
True.
In your conference championship game.
So if you are Clemson or Colorado, well, nah. If you're Clemson, we'll pick on them. If you're Clemson, you go to the SEC title game, you lose to Miami. You are also 9-3. Do you take Bama over Clemson?
Close to the top 12, though, right?
They're 17.
Yeah,
but you got to think, right? I think BYU loses again. They're only 3 spots away.
The only way a 3-loss team gets in is if it's an SEC team and they lost the SEC championship and a couple other things happen. Your Notre Dame gets knocked off, or Indiana loses big time, or BYU loses and Colorado ends up. But yeah, but I just wonder, like, I just saw a bunch of different scenarios. Like, they even talked about, should Indiana sit out their starting quarterback for the game against Ohio State?
Ridiculous.
I mean, he's been injured. He's been injured, right?
If he's not healthy enough, you don't play him. But you need to win this game. And so
But if you
If
don't,
he's
you can
helped,
say we weren't with our starting quarterback. The same way, like in March Madness, if you let's say, remember in March Madness, if you 10 games without your star player, they take that into consideration.
the problem is your strength of schedule is not good enough for you to make that argument. If you
Right.
had maybe
Right.
Ohio State strength of schedule, you could probably make that argument of, we didn't have our guy, right? Give
Yeah,
us a
you're right.
shot. This happened, I think, well, Clemson ended up winning the ACC championship during COVID. Clemson, when they played Notre Dame, this was DJ Uiagalelei's first start. He was actually great in that game, but Notre Dame won the game, right? Clemson dropped a little bit, and the case they were making to get in the playoff, had they lost to Notre Dame in the rematch, was to say, well, um, we didn't have Trevor Lawrence that first game, right? So cut us some slack on that loss. We still played a close game. We ended up winning. So I hear what you're saying, but no, if you're Indiana, you got to act like you're down on the scorecards, right? To make a boxing analogy, you got to pretend like you're down on the scorecards, and we need to get a knockout in this next couple of rounds. And beating Ohio State, one, it would put you into the Big Ten title game no matter what happens, because you would have the tiebreaker. So now, if you wanted to potentially sit in for the Big Ten title game with Ohio State win in your back pocket, I think that's whack. I think
If
that's
they beat Ohio State, they're in regardless, no matter what happens in the Big Ten title game.
true.
So you play him in the Big Ten title game to get the bye. You know what I mean? Like, there's no benefit sitting him in the Big Ten title game because you're in already.
Man, I'm gonna tell you like this. I'm gonna make a battle rap analogy. Thinking you got it made with this committee is like booking clean paper for your event.
Yeah, right.
You don't know what's going to happen. He might show up. He might not show up. This committee, they might say, yeah, you're
There's
in
so
with
much
that win
to
over
talk
Ohio
about,
State.
bro. There's so much more. I could do this for the next half an hour.
Yes. All right. Let's keep
Army's
it moving.
undefeated too with the same schedule as Indiana, but we don't want to talk about that.
Well,
and
again,
an opportunity to beat Notre Dame, so
night game, national stage. If they win, yeah. Yep. Well, they still got to leapfrog Boise State, though. So they would have to hope that Boise
I'm just
State
saying that
loses
they're
at
not
some
even
point.
up there. Like the strength of schedule is pretty much right there with Indiana. Yes.
Yeah.
It is what it is. So yeah. Man.
All right, so let's jump into this.